Introduce parasocial relationship in eastasia.
Why is it common for people to feel attached to idols, celebrities, or fictional characters? Even though these interactions are very one-sided, the feelings we have for them may be as strong as if we genuinely knew them. These attachments, marked precisely by how one-sided the interactions are parasocial, and a lot of industries
I thought it was like
Before we dive into the
streamer
details,
thing.
let's see a few extreme cases from East Asia. Keep in mind, I'm highlighting some of the most infamous depictions of parasocial relationships, and this isn't representative of what the majority
Especially the BTS fans and all the stuff, idols and all.
obsession goes too far. China 2007. A man jumps into the sea, hoping his suicide would guilt Hong Kong actor-singer Andy Lau into meeting his daughter, an obsessed fan. His daughter, Yang Li-jun, was so obsessed with Andy Lau that she had quit school as she spent all her time thinking about her idol. Her dream was to tell Andy
Actual
Lau how
obsession.
much she loved him. To support this dream, Yang Li-jun's parents sold their only house to fund her trips to Hong Kong. Her dad had also attempted to sell a kidney to the local hospital, but was refused as it was illegal. Yang Li-jun did manage to finally meet Andy Lau at a fan club event celebrating his birthday, but she didn't get a chance to have a conversation with him. This was devastating to her as she wasn't able to fulfill her lifelong dream of telling him how much she liked him. And this led to her father tragically choosing to end his life. His suicide was accompanied by a 12-page letter pleading with Andy to meet his daughter and to give her just 5 minutes of his time. Andy Lau's agency denied the request, with the actor stating that he hoped she could move on with her life. It's reported that Andy Lau had to seek help from a psychiatrist, not just from this lone incident, but also from other fans who would send fan letters in only to threaten self-harm if they could not meet him. In Korea, obsessive fans are known as sasaeng fans. A quick list of some infamous incidents include sasaengs shaving their head and cross-dressing to infiltrate male bathrooms that their idols were using, renting the same vans and parking in the same place to pick up or to really kidnap these idols, and also setting cameras in hotels.
Kidnap, huh?
Extreme cases also happen in Japan, like
actually committing a crime.
where an obsessive fan zoomed into the pupils of an idol to find out where she lived. In these very extreme cases, the fans go too far by stalking or harassing their idols to obtain interaction, at the cost of causing harm to others. The vast majority of parasocial fans
Depending location from the eye.
comments of support or the feelings they have may never be directly acknowledged and are okay with that. And that's what we'll be focusing on. But before we dive in, we need to understand a bit more about this phenomenon in general. First, the idea of parasocial or one-sided relationships isn't anything new. It was first coined by Horton and Wall in 1956, and at first it was just the idea of parasocial interactions, which lasts for however long the viewing experience was, so there was no such thing as someone living rent-free in your mind. But this concept was then expanded to also include long-term relationships formed between viewers and media figures, which extends past that initial media exposure, as this was known as parasocial relationships. The most interesting part of this phenomenon for me is perfectly summarized by Derek and others as they state. Although people consciously know that parasocial relationships are not real relationships, in many ways they feel psychologically
still do it anyway.
If these relationships are all one-sided, how do people get attached and what do they get out of it? There are some theories we can look into to explain why parasocial relationships can be fulfilling, like the uses and gratifications theory. In a nutshell, this theory states that people don't just passively consume media and watch something for the sake of watching something, but rather they seek out media to satisfy psychological needs. For example, wanting to be entertained, wanting to learn something, wanting a sense of social interaction, or a lot of the times in my case, wanting to procrastinate and ignore something that really needs to be done. At this point, if I'm not stress watching Netflix, I'm doing it wrong. But I do want to draw special attention to one of the common psychological
I just want to escape the labs.
the fact that media is able to fulfill a sense of social interaction. This is pretty important, as if someone is feeling lonely and they don't
And you myself social creature, so
consuming media is a very low barrier and easy way to fill that need. Something else that is super interesting is to consider our evolutionary instincts. For example, we have a tendency to like those we encounter more frequently and to become attached to people we often see. This helped us bond with our tribe mates back in our caveman days and helped us recognize who was and wasn't a threat. But nowadays, we can see and recognize so many people's faces despite never meeting or interacting with any of them in real life. So someone who's watching a TV show may consciously know that these people aren't real, but our evolutionary instinct feelings don't make that distinction. So our feelings of attachment and closeness still form, just as they would for a real person. With the rise of social media as well, the occurrence of parasocial relationships becomes even more evident. If we think about it, back in the day, we only ever saw celebrities in whatever movies they starred in. Press conferences and interviews were where we could catch glimpses of them in more normal settings. But now with platforms like Instagram, you can easily follow somebody and see what they're up to in their daily lives, where they went and what they did without breaking any laws. These constant updates from celebrities and idols also makes their presence a lot more
updating the stories and all that stuff.
Parasocial relationships are much more likely to be formed via social media rather than traditional media. Because parasocial relationships often occur between fans and characters or celebrities, it makes East Asia a fascinating place to examine, since many of their big cultural exports like the idol industry or the anime industry is fueled by fandom. And we'll see that as much as parasocial fans exert pressure onto idols, like reacting badly if they date, threatening boycotts and so on, parasocial relationships are also used to escape pressure. And all of this reflects really interesting social cultural norms. To start us off, I want to look at China first, the enormous power these fans hold and what these fans get out of their one-way relationships. Often we see fans as people who support their favorite celebrities and play more of a background role. But what if this relationship dynamic changes and fans are the ones who actually can influence celebrities? A term more specific to China when we're talking about parasocial fans are parakin fans. Parakin fans are fans that engage in fantasized kinships with their idols. These fans will often call themselves sister fans, brother fans, mother and father fans to their idol. These terms aren't really seen in the West because I feel like we kind of just skip that step entirely. Like, you guys call yourself mom and dad fans? That's kind of weird. Anyways, I can bark. Notice that all these titles are all related to family,
I have never heard that
and culture. For decades, China enforced a one-child policy, and as a result of this, the generation between 1980 and 2015 grew up without siblings. So this kinship they formed with idols could provide a sense of fulfillment for this generation who was missing siblings, and be of comfort to aging parents who are your mom and dad fans that might be feeling lonely after their only child grows up and leaves the house. Parakin fans branding themselves as family, as brothers, sisters, moms and dads also often allows them a sense of entitlement over
so one's family is still affecting to this day.
much more liberal in terms of voicing their opinions of how idols should act and what they should do. When idols are caught in dating rumors or are revealed to be dating, the mature response is to of course be happy for them. But not all fans handle this news well. Regardless of how fans react, it's the idol's life and their choice. So very rarely do we see idols actually breaking off a relationship if a portion of their fans don't agree. However, this was exactly the case for one Chinese celebrity. In early 2019, actor and singer Jeffrey Tang was caught dating actress Gina Jin shortly after their co-appearance on a TV program. The sister fans of Jeffrey believed Gina to be too old for him. She was only 5 years older, and a significant stretch into his career, which they believed was about to take off. These Parakin fans put out a strike online and threatened to leave him. A week later, Jeffrey announced his breakup with Gina on social media. Parakin fans hold a lot of power because they are able to act together as a collective. Often there is a clear division of duties and responsibilities, and Parakin fans get things done. These fans might to get their idols trending online and even pay for billboards for special events so the idol can get more exposure. For example, Chinese fans put Cai Shukun on the Nasdaq Plaza when he debuted, and this didn't cost the agency anything. The fans completely funded this. Promoting idols in public places isn't just a Chinese fan thing though. It's definitely very common across many Asian fan bases. But imagine how expensive a billboard is and how much collective effort it requires to do something so large scale for an idol. And if we're talking fans coordinating efforts and resources, then I have to bring up the infamous milk wastage incident in 2021. China had an idol debuting reality show called Youth with You, where after months around 120 contestants were whittled down to 20. After the final voting round, the top 9 contestants would debut in an idol group. Viewers could vote up to 3 times a day, but if you wanted additional votes, you had to purchase a specific yogurt product from the main sponsor and scan a unique QR code under the lid of the yogurt to get that extra entry. Evidently, dedicated fan clubs honed in on this extra entry clause, and Together, 48 million yuan or 7.5 million USD was raised for the top 9 contestants to secure them their final spot. However, these
Yes,
purchases
a
came
sincere
under
amount of
fire
money.
when videos were posted online of workers pouring yogurt down the drain in a process to farm the QR codes. Consequently, state-run news agency Xinhua criticized the program and their voting process, stating, "This is seeking profits and attention through waste and squander, showing a lack of respect for labor." Throughout all of these cases, we can see that Paragon fans do a lot for their idols because of how emotionally invested they are in them. We'll now break down some of the biggest reasons why Chinese people get into parasocial relationships and become Paragon fans. Just like how all human behavior is driven by intrinsic and extrinsic motives, the reasons behind how someone becomes a Paragon fan can be split similarly into buckets of being self or idol-oriented. Within these two categories, Paragon fan motives are split even further, and this is where we can gain some insight into the why. One big motive for Paragon fans is escapism. This falls under self-oriented motivation, so you do this for yourself, and it describes fans that engage in parasocial relationships to escape from a lacking reality. Another motive, also falling under self-oriented motivation, is identity acquisition. Being part of a fandom can be a huge time commitment and shape a big part
They're
of
losing identity, so
Paragon fans, as we mentioned,
and to create
provide
a new one.
incredible support, but it also comes with certain expectations, pretty much like the kind you'd expect from family. Now, these sentiments aren't exactly like telling your favorite idol, "Why don't you go be a doctor instead?" But instead they might say, and this is an actual comment by a mom fan in regards to their idol, "I expect them to act in more meaningful, deeper movies." When I saw that he was going to take a role in a really shallow and naive movie, I posted so many comments in my group expressing my strong objection, as I didn't want to see any self-destruction from him. Later on, I realized a lot of fans shared my opinion, and he finally turned that part down. Paragon fans therefore believe that it's their responsibility to tell idols when they think they're stepping out of line, and that they're doing this for their own good. There are some other motives which are also very interesting to look at, but I'll give you one
And
line
I
of
think they're
summaries for them,
doing
otherwise this
their
video
going
will
good,
take
I
years.
guess.
So, self-achievement. You help make it as easy as possible for your idol to succeed. If you're a part of the PR division where you're always in the replies, clarifying things, being helpful, introducing new fans to their content, you belong here. You feel satisfied when your idols succeed because you're happy for them, and the group's achievements feel like a team effort to you. Entertainment satisfaction is exactly what it sounds like. You follow the idol and watch shows they're in because it's fun and you enjoy watching them. Physical attraction.
And you are
This is a big
emotion,
one, and it's one of the main reasons people like the idols.
depressed
I know you might
into
really like the person
terms
in
of
too, but when they have a 10 out of 10 face, that never hurts. Companionship. Interacting with your idol through social media and following their schedule,
especially
makes
in
it
live
clear that
stream.
they're present with you, which may be comforting if someone's feeling lonely. These are all reasons why someone might become a Paragon fan, and honestly, a lot of them sound pretty relatable. The main takeaway from Paragon fans though is that yes, they are dedicated, but that love is conditional. There are expectations to be met. From what we've seen so far, Paragon fans exert a lot of pressure onto idols, but there's also an interesting flip side to it. Now I want to dive into how parasocial relationships help in terms of relieving people of pressure and of the same expectations placed onto them by society. To do this, we're going to take a look at Chinese culture in a lot more depth and dissect a frog game. To understand what kind of
Repeating
pressures exist
what the
in
same
Chinese
man mean.
society, we'll first need to understand two important concepts. The first is filial piety, and the second is a term called 人情. Filial piety, the act of showing respect for the older generation, was advocated by Confucianists and is at the core of traditional Chinese culture and China's social structure. 人情 ties into this and is essentially the exchange of favors. Because China is a 人情 based society, the emphasis is really on if you receive a favor, you have to pay it back. And this is core to everything in Chinese culture in terms of ethics and relationships with family, friends, and colleagues. Because paying back favors is so important, you can see why there's also such a strong emphasis on young people paying respects to the older generation that's come before them. And this respect is often in the form of taking care of the older generation, but also doing what they say in a way that shows filial piety. These expressions of filial piety and 人情 could go even further, with some saying that the young generation has a responsibility to carry on the older generation's wishes
Extra responsible, huh?
they want. At least that was how things were. There's still a very, very strong culture
And
of
sometimes
filial
things
piety,
go
but
too
you'll
far.
find sometimes young people aren't as willing to be filial. From a historical standpoint, two significant eras arose in China that were critical of Confucianism and challenged the idea of filial piety. And I'll go through this very briefly again, like a 90-second crash course. The first was the May 4th movement, which happened in the 1910s. It criticized Confucianism for its traditional values and advocated for modernization. The May 4th movement pushed for individualism, gender equality, and intellectual freedom, things that they believed Confucianism oppressed. The second major era that was critical of Confucianism was the Cultural Revolution in the 1980s. This was a social-political movement led by Mao Zedong, the chairman of the CPC, with the aim of purging capitalist and nationalist elements from Chinese society. Mao Zedong emphasized loyalty to the state and encouraged the youth to rebel against traditional authority figures, including parents, teachers, and elders. So, in essence, rejecting that idea of filial piety, which is key to Confucianism. Now, I'm going to say something that might confuse you. We just mentioned these major historical movements that challenged Confucianism, but Chinese society still, at its core, operates on the basis of Confucian values. Take this recent example. To reduce the pressure on welfare systems, the government has introduced laws where adults have legal responsibility to take care of their parents, which further reinforces this idea and expectation of filial piety. So, what's the point of talking about all these movements that challenge Confucianism if it's still
there's no point.
in modern-day China? Well, it may not have fundamentally revolutionized the way Chinese society is today, but its impacts can still be recognized. Education reforms, cultural movements diminishing Confucian influence, and the introduction of Western values has led to a rise in individual autonomy, leading to young people expecting to live a free and independent life. The younger generation might be thinking their parents are of the same status as them and shouldn't tell them what to do. Or they may fulfill some expectations, but they can't accept living a life following their parents' ambitions and want more freedom in choosing a life for themselves. Regardless of how young people think, they can't shake off these obligations, which is where a lot of this pressure is coming from. Okay, so now that we have some
cultural
context
influence,
behind
that's
China,
why
the concepts of renting, of filial piety, and the
should
evolution
probably
of
change the
Western
media
influence, we can
parts.
finally talk about this cute frog game. Oh, actually, before we talk about the frog game, let's quickly pretend we're living in China as a young person. The reality is that there's fierce competition and a lot of pressure. By the way, shameless plug to my last video where I dive into how bad all this pressure really gets in China, but watch that one later. Because of all this competition, pressure, and expectations placed, it's not uncommon for individuals to choose to live out their life and their dreams vicariously. Cue our favorite frog. Travel Frog is a game developed by Japanese studio Hitpoint Co., where players take care of their frog, but not much else. The frog goes on adventures of its own and comes back home sometimes to see you for a bit before they're off again. While the premise is quite simple, it absolutely captivated the hearts of Chinese players and is one of the most famous single-player games in China. Many players formed parasocial relationships with the frog through this game, and we can actually see here the impact of culture on the attachments that are formed. Studies show that Japanese participants, usually female players which developed parasocial relationships with the frog, see the frog as their husband. And this is likely because work trips are a big part of Japanese culture, so the frog going away is similar to the work trips that their husbands do.
I think I can relate to this.
China, where many players regard the frog as a son to take care of. This was so fascinating to me. So then,
We should actually play the game and see.
And the parasocial relationships being developed prompted a lot of reflection over why players liked the game and why they felt such a strong bond with the frog. A study by Zhou Nansong in 2021 used focus groups to look exactly into this very phenomenon. To start off, participants were asked what they liked about Travel Frog, and many players responded that they yearned for the stress-free and independent lifestyle that the frog in the game had. When the frog wanted to go somewhere, it did, without regard for anything else. The follow-up question to these participants then was, why didn't they live this lifestyle?
It doesn't work in
and
real
the
life though.
responses directly reflected a lot of cultural context we mentioned earlier. One player said that they wanted this lifestyle, but was unable to pursue it because of the expectations that were placed on them. It's common in China to see the older generation have some sort of roadmap for when they think young people should get married and buy a home and have kids, which restricts the autonomy of the younger generation. Another player responded that there were many practical problems which limited her, as she raised questions like, if I left, who's going to take care of my parents? If I traveled all the time, how would I be able to keep a stable relationship? How will I make money and how will I save money? These anxieties around family obligations, financial security, and marriage prospects all tie back to cultural values, how families should be, and what responsibilities young people have. Even though these players yearn for the frog's independent, carefree lifestyle, it's something that might be out of reach for them due to societal pressure and the practicality of it all. However, they're able to project this desire they have onto the frog, watching it live a carefree life and travel around instead of giving up on this wish entirely. If we take this one step further, this wish can then explain why a large amount of Parasocial fans from China view the frog specifically as a son. Based on the idea of Confucian filial piety that we mentioned before, children were expected to fulfill their parents' wishes and to bring honor to the family. In the same vein, players project their hopes onto the frog, and given the specific cultural context, it's easy for Chinese players to see the frog as their child. I also need to highlight here how unique the parasocial interaction is in Travel Frog compared to other games. Usually in a game, when you input an action to move forward, the character responds because you're playing through that character. But in Travel Frog, you're not the frog. Sure, you can do things, but the frog has a will of its own. This delayed feedback gives the impression that the player is not in control and the frog does what it wants, which is exactly what many of these players desire in a parent-child relationship, as echoed by this respondent who says, "I named the frog with my English name. The frog is like my son and it also is like myself. It has its own things to chase after." Through Travel Frog, we can see how parasocial relationship with the frog represents cultural influences through the manifestation of each
with a will of his own.
desires. Beneath the parasocial relationship that is developed with the frog lies a criticism of their current lifestyle and expectations placed on them. Our exploration of parasocial relationships in China revealed a push and pull of pressure and expectations. We discussed Parakan fans whose devotion can translate to extraordinary pressure on idols, and we looked at parasocial relationships formed through the game Travel Frog, which revealed a simple wish from the players to escape the pressures from everyday life. So we looked at how invested fans and players can be when they form parasocial relationships, but we didn't really go into how this might be encouraged. The truth is, when fans are this dedicated, there's a clear economic benefit to be had. And when we think about dedicated fans, the first thing that comes to my mind isn't China, but the K-pop scene. So let's take a look at Korea and how they've mastered the craft of not just getting fans, but in cultivating parasocial relationships. Most of you probably clicked into this video thinking of the Korean idol industry, and that's a testament to how passionate their fans are. Central to the K-pop idol's relevance as a lasting cultural product is the cultivation of parasocial relationships. Parasocial relationships, as we mentioned earlier when we looked into Paragon fans, don't necessarily have to be bad. Often we form these non-reciprocal bonds as a way to fulfill psychological needs which might not be able to be met. Parasocial relationships tend to our need of belonging and a need of validation. When it comes to K-pop though, and as someone who has created a stan Twitter account for 3 weeks back when COVID started, this is my takeaway. Being a fan is fun, but being part of fandom is work. Twitter, I swear, at one point was owned by ARMY, who are the fans of K-pop group BTS. This chart, looking at 2017, shows the top most used hashtags in the world. The top 4 are all BTS related. This graph, I know, is a blast to the past, but the power of K-pop fandoms has only grown. It's not just K-pop fans though, but fandom power in general. In fact, in the most recent Twitter report, they literally called out FanWorld as something to look out for. We looked at Paragon fans when we discussed China to capture the unique parasocial relationships that were formed there. For Korea, Jung proposes the term fancom as a system by which fans manage their idols, but it's less so about their expectations and more so about taking actions to enhance their image. For example, fans actively participate in social cultural events like fundraising, donating to charity, and undertaking efforts to make sure these idols flourish. These fans may also often participate in a lot of free PR for the company, like promoting artists on social media threads or translating material so more people can access the idol group and become fans, and generating discussion around the idols so more people are aware of them. Fancom practices also include fans feeling compelled to maybe police the content that is on social media if there is something detrimental to the idol's image, like spamming good keywords and hashtags to trick the algorithm into making those keywords trending instead of the supposed scandal. And something interesting about the way fan culture is evolving is that instead of these fans just passively observing the idols perform in the traditional landscape, fans nowadays actively cultivate this parasocial relationship by taking actions themselves that enhances this idea of their idol. This then touches upon a concept called participatory culture, theorized by media scholar Henry Jenkins. This refers to a culture in which individuals
have taken actions
but also participate
themselves.
in the creation and distribution of media narratives. A related term is prosumers, combining the term consumer and content producer, as nowadays fans often interact, edit, and revamp content like producers would. Fancom practice also includes trying to support the idol by breaking streaming records or album purchasing records. In fact, research by Liang in 2016 indicates that fans' purchasing behaviors for their idols represents a kind of self-identity, bringing them not only a sense of belonging within their fandom, but also a sense of satisfaction. That might explain why fans in parasocial relationships are often linked to overconsumption. We saw this in the milk wastage incident in China, but a similar occurrence applies in K-pop too. By design, K-pop albums have photo cards, which are exclusive pictures of the idols, and whatever photo card is put in the album is random. If you have a group of 6 people and there's only one random photo card, you might end up getting a member that isn't your favorite member. So the idea is someone should buy 6 copies of the same album just for a good chance of drawing their favorite member. In addition to that, albums also come in different variations. So your favorite idol could have taken 3 different poses for their photo card, and now the really dedicated fans might try to complete the collection of their favorite member. More rare than photo cards and much more similar to a lottery system are chances to participate in fan calls. Fan calls give fans a chance to talk to their idol in a one-on-one call for around a minute, but to be chosen, it's a raffle system, and one ticket is usually tied
Oh
to
my
one
god,
album purchase.
this
This
is
lottery
so
system
dumb.
encourages fans to buy tens or hundreds of copies of the same album to raise their odds. What this results in are perfectly good albums going to waste, as often they'll just be left on the side of the road. One person took to Twitter to express their frustrations from seeing another K-pop group's albums being dumped, as they call for this person to be responsible for their own waste. Tweets like this highlight the problem of overconsumption, waste, and the environmental impacts of implementing random photo cards and lottery fan call draws that are all tied to album sales, as the fans who are
Just to meet
contributing to
one-on-one,
the most are the ones buying exorbitant
spending
copies
hundreds
for
of
these reasons.
dollars.
Whether it's luck-based draws or idol fundraising events, it's clear that fans can provide tremendous financial support, and the stronger the attachment between fan and idol, the more fancom practices there are. Therefore, if you're an entertainment agency and you're launching an idol group, which isn't cheap, and you've invested all this money and time to train them up, you want fans to feel attached to them. You want fans that will root for them, clear paths for them, gather them
It's a
into
basic
clubs,
capitalism.
spread word of mouth, and financially support the group through buying albums and merchandise. In the beginning of this section, we mentioned that Korea's big entertainment companies had really mastered the craft of connecting audiences with their idols to help cultivate parasocial relationships. So let's take a look at some of the strategies agencies might use to help parasocial bonds form. First, before the companies even show the new idols, they'll often make an announcement followed by teaser clips to create a sense of anticipation, kind of like seeing the trailers before movies are released. Then, before any official debut, companies will often show behind-the-scenes clips so fans can see idols
Behind the scenes, huh?
situations beyond the stage. Companies may also often publicize the idol's journey in getting to where they are, to highlight the idea that celebrities aren't necessarily where they are now because they're naturally talented, but because they've really put in the hard work. This makes us
Want
want
to
to root for them
humanize
and see
them.
them be rewarded for all their efforts, as well as playing into an aspirational ideal that anyone can become an idol if they're determined and willing to work hard. Compared to the earlier days of K-pop,
Not
where
true.
groups were promoted with an air of mystery, now it's all about relatability and accessibility. The creation of VLive, an online live streaming app for Korean stars to connect with their fans, was therefore a game changer. Fans would be notified to join the live stream whenever it occurred and interact with their idol in real time. They could leave messages in the chat, and there would be a chance that the idol might see their message and respond. The ability to share the same moment with the idol or celebrity allowed for greater intimacy than ever before. Some other examples include rules like dating bans,
Yeah,
where
now
new
seems
idols
to
are
be
expected
expected
to
from
remain single
Parasocial.
to appeal to teenagers fantasies. These are all some tactics that can be used, but obviously I'm not here to reduce fan support as a result of X or Y or Z strategy. It's just from a company's point of view that things are a lot more transactional because of the potential of parasocial relationships. So far, we've looked at parasocial relationships between fans and idols, or real people. But parasocial relationships can also develop even if these people aren't real. For the final part of this video, I want to look at how parasocial bonds may develop
No
between us
person
and fictional
relationship.
characters. I will be looking in particular into the gaming and anime industry, and it's fascinating how real our feelings can get even when the
in the
characters
webs.
themselves aren't.
fictional character.
I chose to look at Japan for fictional characters because of how well known their gaming and anime industries are. Anime is probably one of Japan's most widely
How is anime going to compare
whilst
with
Japan's gaming
real
industry is
person?
the world's third biggest market in 2021 with a value of 29 billion. Obviously, Japan also has a thriving idol and entertainment industry too, but I'll be focusing on just anime and gaming for this section. With anime, the first big difference in examining parasocial relationships is that a lot of the times we form bonds with the characters based on shared values. Yes, most of the times characters will still be really good looking, but fans will point out traits like liking a character's tenacity and determination as they navigate through all their obstacles. I mean, when you think about it, this makes perfect sense, since through storytelling we get a lot more depth to the background of a character. Research shows that when everything else is equal, we tend to prefer kind and likable people, so it makes sense that the words used most frequently to describe our favorite characters are determined, loyal, perseverant, bold, distinct, kind, and self-sacrificing. The last one is a bit concerning, but I guess that's just a trait that many main characters and heroes have. To illustrate this point further, in 2020, a survey asked around 7,600 elementary school students across Japan who they most looked up to, and Tanjiro from Demon Slayer was the #1 most voted answer. Mums only came in at
Okay,
#2. Amongst the reasons
Demon
why
Slayer.
Tanjiro was chosen, the most common response echoed that he always tries his best without giving up, whilst other reasons included he is always nice to everyone, and if I think about Tanjiro, I can do my best. That's literally so wholesome. But it's not always the nice characters that can steal our heart, although they seem to be fan favorites. Any character that pulls us in, makes us feel what they feel, and go through things good and bad with them can leave a lasting impression on us. In a way, this is a reflection less on parasocial interactions and more on good writing. If we finish a book or a show and the story just remains in our head, then the author did a great job. What about if we look less at characters and stories and more on actual fan behavior? In relation to anime, you have fans that enjoy the content and then fans who show more attachment and more parasocial behavior. A term that's relevant to the more obsessed side of things is the word otaku. When looking at fan behavior, a study was done by Raisin and others in exploring anime fan obsession, and they measured it on 3 scales. The first was fanship, the extent one considers themselves a fan of something. The second, fandom, the extent of them identifying with the community. And finally, on obsession, where respondents answered a series of questions like, I spend all my free time watching anime, and I can sometimes be obsessive watching anime. When compared to non-otakus, self-identified otakus scored higher for all 3 measures. What exactly then is an otaku? The Google definition of an otaku is someone who is obsessed with computers or pop culture in Japan to the detriment of their social skills. Not exactly a label you'd give yourself with pride. And several scholars paint otakus in quite a negative light.
Italian obsession then.
Characteristics like fanatical introversion, friendlessness, having a gloomy expression, and sitting alone in class, which is not a great look. Unless they choose to just sit next to the window, then all of a sudden I think they might not be an otaku, but just every edgy main character we know instead. 2 more terms most often jokingly used to establish attachment to the character are the terms waifu and husbandos. Waifu refers to a fictional character an anime fan considers to be wife material, or their wife, and husbando is the husband equivalent. A lot of the times these terms are used jokingly, but it is a term of affection and greater attachment to the character. And a really interesting observation that Raisin and others
Is the actual
study
web
was
part.
that fans who have a waifu or husbando report relying on the anime fandom to achieve optimal distinctiveness. What is optimal distinctiveness? This refers to the balancing act, where we want to stand out and be unique, but not too much, not to the point where you feel alone, or to the point where you're sticking out like a sore thumb. So for anime fans with a waifu or husbando, they're more likely to use the anime fandom to balance this need. This likely we could tie back to the responses from these fans on how they perceive the anime fandom to be more unique, and how their strong sense of belonging helps distinguish themselves from other people. Looking at anime allowed us to see how parasocial bonds may be formed differently when it's in relation to fictional characters. But watching anime is still quite a passive act because you're watching something happen. Does this differ then when we compare it to gaming, for example, when the player is actively interacting with the content? Unsurprisingly, it kind of does. And when players form parasocial attachments, their spending behavior is also likely to increase, as we see patterns quite similar to how K-pop capitalizes on fans having parasocial relationships. Within Japan's gaming industry, one of the most profitable genres are gacha games, grossing billions worldwide in recent years. Gacha games are
Gacha.
games where players can spend money, both real or in-game currency, towards a gambling system so they can gain
Ayan
points. Within the community, this is also known as pulling power.
game ba?
Players usually pull for a character based on their desirability as fictional people. Lax and Mackenzie state that this desire to obtain a character is due to a parasocial relationship that has been developed based on the character's aesthetic, their personality,
League of Legends, Valorant, all that stuff.
to be a form of online gambling, because when players pull for a character, they have to spend in-game
Overwatch.
currency, and it's not guaranteed that they'll get the character.
Okay.
For example, in Japanese game Grand Order, the chance you'll get one of the rarest characters is 0.7%. So to reliably get the character, you should expect to spend around $458 worth of in-game currency.
Jesus.
From a survey sent out to almost 1,000 Japanese Grand Order players, 20% revealed that they've spent this much to
Spending money on virtual
A
things.
third of these players who've spent $460 already didn't even manage to successfully pull for their character. Something that might separate gacha mechanics from more traditional online gambling is how odds are often personified. Some gacha communities refer to successfully pulling a character they wanted as them coming home.
I'm sorry, buddy. I didn't really expect you're gonna come home.
Reflecting that the character has recognized the player's desire and
Come
come to where they
home.
belong. The other genre of games that I wanted to draw attention to in this video in relation to parasocial relationships are otome and idol games. Otome games are story-based games targeted towards women, where one of the goals would be for the player to form a romantic relationship with one of the male characters. Idol games are usually more popular amongst men.
How does that even work?
Simulation game where you can complete rhythm challenges to train up your idols, and the end goal is to make them into the biggest idol in Japan. In both these types of games, it's easy to form attachments to these characters and consequently develop parasocial relationships. A focus study was done with 20 Japanese participants that regularly played games to better understand if a player's preference on an in-game character had anything to do with how they saw other people in real life. Since dating sims often portray an impressive array of characters that are visually very good looking and have unique storylines where the romance develops, having similar expectations for real life would make things a bit difficult. When it comes to the male players, many of them responded that they had similar preferences for game characters and people in the real world. One male player who liked idol games said that he was influenced by these game characters and that his standards for girls in the real world may be elevated because of the expectations the girls in the games met. Some female players then revealed that based on the
No one
game
can compare with
they
the anime.
dreamed of the romantic scenes in the games to be real and to happen to them in the real world. There were then both female and male respondents who stated that they weren't
Excellent
affected by
delusion.
game characters, in the sense that them liking game characters didn't affect what kind of people they liked in the real world. Most of the responses in the study were quite balanced, which, as you would think, represents the large majority of the gaming demographic. However, whilst researching, I did come across some almost impressive levels of dedication some fans had, like this fan celebrating child's birthday, or this man who actually unofficially married Vocaloid
Okay,
in 2018. I feel like that's about as dedicated as you can get, and honestly, good
Yes,
for
that's
you
too
for being
bad.
honest with Miku. For that child fan though, I just want to know, are you adopting? This video has gone on for a long time.
Actually,
but to be
I
fair,
love
we
Dawn.
did talk about a lot of things. We looked at parasocial relationships through an East Asian context, how this attachment might form, as well as what behaviors fans might exhibit towards real people and fictional characters. Even though a lot of the time what we'll hear in the media about this topic are the really extreme cases, and this is also what I did in the beginning of the video to hook you in, parasocial relationships at its crux is about fulfilling a need, and typical parasocial relationships aren't harmful. That being said, like everything in life, there needs to be a balance.
Yeah,
It's very
balance.
broad and unhealthy obsession that
I was
should
about to say that.
from us. I also think this topic is just one that's going to become more and more relevant as more things move online. Social media has already eroded a lot of our face-to-face interactions, and then COVID exacerbated our reliance on the internet, so more of us probably have parasocial relationships than you'd initially guess. For me, my most recent parasocial rabbit hole was actually
Yeah, a lot of
getting
people are
purely
coming
into
online,
the
so
2015 OKC Thunder squad and feeling sad about KD and Westbrook for 3 days straight. But what about you? What are your thoughts on forming parasocial relationships?
2020
And do you think
onwards,
you've ever
there are a lot of
experienced
parasocial
one?
relationships
I'd
out
love
there.
to hear what you think or if any part of this video really stood out to you. For me,
Okay.
I found the study on Travel Frog and the types of parasocial relationships formed there so interesting. Thank you for watching all the way until the
Okay.
end. Make sure to subscribe if you enjoyed, and I'll see
就像比较的不能这样。
you. Bye!